conserve la calma, permanezca en su lugar y siga las instrucciones del personal. En caso de incendio, mantenga la calma y evacúe el recinto siguiendo las instrucciones. Si requiere atención especial, indíquelo al personal del staff del evento. En caso de evacuación, diríjase al punto de reunión de manera ordenada y en silencio siguiendo la ruta de evacuación señalizada. Gracias.
¿Listo? ¿Ya? Sí, ¿verdad? Listo. Bueno, pues buenas tardes. Muy bienvenidos a nuestra última sesión del Seminario Permanente de Propiedad Intelectual de este semestre y de este año. Estamos muy contentos de recibir al doctor Aman Gebru, que es profesor investigador también en la Universidad de Houston actualmente, ¿no? Él llevó a cabo su, tiene educación de su maestría en la Universidad de Washington, su doctorado en la Universidad de Toronto, y pues es experto en el tema que nos trae hoy, que es sobre apropiación cultural. También es experto en temas de marcas. Y bueno, me voy a permitir comentarles un poco de la dinámica del seminario de hoy, dado que el doctor Aman Gebru solamente habla inglés. Él va a dar su ponencia completamente en inglés. Al final de su ponencia voy a hacer un breve resumen en español para aquellos los que nos siguen y finalmente, bueno, vamos a tener el intercambio que siempre tenemos con los coordinadores de este seminario. Dos de ellos hoy se encuentran en línea, el doctor Becerra y la doctora Carmen, y pues ya saben, cualquier pregunta que tengan nos la pueden poner también por vía el chat de Zoom. Entonces, habiendo dicho lo anterior, me voy a permitir cambiar al inglés. Aman, it's really nice that you were able to visit us here at UNAM. We're very happy to host you and that you're bringing this topic with us because we have been talking a lot about cultural appropriation, but it's always very interesting to know what are the views in other jurisdictions, in other territories. So very welcome to UNAM, very welcome to the Institute of Juridical Studies, and on behalf of the Permanent Seminar of Intellectual Property, we thank you for being here and sharing your work with us. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. This is working, right?
Sí.
Yeah. Great. Hi, everyone, online and in person. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me, and of course, others in the IP Institute as well. I'm using a glass that's translating from Spanish to English as well, so hopefully that comes through and I can hear what people are saying. But yeah, thank you for inviting me here. This is the third time I'm back in Mexico, and first time was Cancun, second time was Mexico City, speaking at the IP Institute, and so this is really great to be here. I of course know of UNAM and the impressive research that comes out of UNAM, so it's really a privilege to be here. So I'll talk about this research project for today, but I'm also part of the Intellectual Property and Information Law Institute at the University of Houston, and so if there are any questions about potentially studying there or visiting, both for students, PhD students, undergraduate students, and professors as well, those would be interesting conversations that I would like to have. All right, so this is sort of a research that's forthcoming in the Arizona State Law Journal. It's actually, I got the email yesterday with the final draft of it, so if you're interested in getting a copy, I'll be happy to send those out, but it will also be published in the December issue of the Arizona State Law Journal. And I'm calling it Cultural Appropriation as Passing Off. That's sort of the title I'm using. But let me give you sort of a roadmap of where I think this will be going. And as I said, this sort of the citation is there for the journal that's publishing this. The title is Remediating Cultural Appropriation. So I'll first give you the main contribution. Journalists usually say don't bury the lead and sort of state the thesis up front, so I'll start with that. And then defining cultural appropriation is really challenging, and so I'll try to define that based on the research that I've done. And then I'll like to give you 2 examples from the US and about 4 from Mexico of cultural appropriation. And I would love to get feedback from anybody that knows about the cultural appropriation incidents, especially those from Mexico. And so we'll talk about those in the Q&A possibly. And then I'll sort of give you where my sort of the literature review, if you will, placing my research to sort of reflect on research by other people. And so I'll give you the sort of two groups of scholars that are fighting it out about cultural appropriation, between appropriation and cosmopolitanism. And then the two contributions that I would like to make, number 5 and 6. So this paper, I'm hoping, will contribute a taxonomy of cultural appropriation, and then a new theory for cultural passing off, which is sort of building on cause of action from torts, and so the torts of passing off from the UK. And then lastly, I'll give 2 examples of how to apply my framework to existing disputes of cultural appropriation. All right, so the 2 contributions that I mentioned. The first is this quadrant of cultural appropriation, so the sort of 2 by 2, if you will, of how we should talk about cultural appropriation. And I'm hoping this contribution will introduce some clarity and some more depth to our conversations about cultural appropriation. And then the second is going to be sort of developing this new theory of cultural passing off, which is a right against commercial cultural appropriation of a distinct symbol. And so I'll outline what that means in a moment, but that's basically what I'm hoping this research will do. So on to sort of defining cultural appropriation. What we find is that we actually lack a clear definition of cultural appropriation or authoritative definition of the concept, but we do have some elements that we can build on, right? So we have this power imbalance that we find between the taker and the source of the taking. So the person borrowing from the culture has more power, and the source of that taking usually is a community, a group of people that normally are seen as sort of the weaker party in that relationship. A lack of understanding, somebody's taking the symbol without really fully understanding how the symbol plays a role in that community. And so using it in a context that might be incorrect, offensive, and sort of misleading. And there's some sort of harm to the general public as well, not just to the source community. And the harm, and other scholars have done a great job of defining what sorts of harms are present. Offense is the type of harm that usually is talked about. So if the community might be offended in how their cultural appropriation is, or cultural symbol is being used. But I actually think there are multiple other harms, and others have outlined this. The harm that I'm focusing on here is this economic harm. Somebody's taking your symbol and producing products and services in a way that the legal system should care about. Now, in the US, we have some early trends of people claiming a cause of action against cultural appropriation, which is why I started doing this research. And so to motivate this project, let me give you the first of the 2 examples here. So I was interviewed by Bloomberg Law for this lawsuit by MGA Entertainment and Clifford T. Harris. So the Clifford T. Harris group is the daughter of the singer T.I. So the rapper and his wife established sort of music company. His daughter and 2 other girls created a girl band, and the girl band was called OMG Girls. And so they, were mid 2000s. They were famous, or locally famous, as people say. And those are the 3 people that you see on the photo there. Now, MGA Entertainment comes in and says they wanted to do dolls that represent the 3 actors, or singers rather. And they say no, the negotiations don't succeed, and so they don't have a licensing deal. But the company says, we're not going to stop. We're actually going to go ahead and just produce the dolls, and actually call them OMG dolls as well. Now this happened, and the band, of course, hired a lawyer to bring a lawsuit against the MGA Entertainment. MGA Entertainment is a big company that produces dolls. And so, of course, it has lawyers to protect their interests as well. Now, normally the lawsuit is primarily a trademark infringement lawsuit and a right of publicity lawsuit. So somebody is taking your name, image, and likeness without your authorization. That's a right of publicity infringement. and somebody's also selling products using your likeness, and so that could be a trademark infringement. So primarily it's a trademark infringement lawsuit. However, the lawyers for the MGA team adds a cultural appropriation claim sometime while the trial is happening. And so they say, in addition to infringing our trademark and right of publicity, MGA Entertainment is also popularly known as culturally appropriating other people, including us. And so this is an African-American sort of community being defined here, and the appropriator being MGA Entertainment. So the interview that I did with the Bloomberg basically said, wait, this is the first time in the US court that cultural appropriation has been listed as a cause of action. And so that's sort of how we talked about it. Unfortunately, the judge dismisses it because the judge says, one, the legal system does not recognize a cultural appropriation cause of action. Two, it's not relevant for a trademark cause of action. Right? Somebody does not need to engage in cultural appropriation for us to say that this is trademark infringement. And so that gets dismissed. So we don't actually have an opinion from the court saying cultural appropriation is or is not accepted. However, the team actually wins about $71 million in this lawsuit based on the right of publicity and trademark infringement cause of action, right? For the three doles that you see there. The second example is the famous fashion house, Neiman Marcus, based out of Dallas. Sold this they called it Raven Tails knitted coat, and I think there was about, I want to say $5,000 for that piece of clothing. Really sort of expensive. And when people saw that online, they said, wait, that looks like an award-winning design by a member of a native Alaskan community. And so the daughter gets text messages and emails from people that said, wait, your mom won design awards because of that. The design that you see on the left is from the mother. Neiman Marcus product is on the right of the screen. And so when people reach out to her, she says, yeah, that looks really closely like my mom's creation. Luckily for her, the mother had registered it as a copyrighted item in the Copyright Office. The mother had passed on, which is why the daughter brings this lawsuit, or sort of in collaboration with the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, which is a Native Alaskan association, brings this action. Now, unfortunately, Neiman Marcus goes through bankruptcy as this was happening, and so they settle out of court for an unspecified amount. But it looks like they were buying this sort of claim that there is a copyright that's been violated because the Native American Association that is now the recipient of a gift from the designer is saying, I'm representing a communal interest, a property-like interest in the design that Neiman Marcus is taking without authorization. So those two are examples from the US. Now let's switch to the sort of four examples that I'm selecting, but there are many, many more examples, right? As people would appreciate in this group, the Mexican culture is really rich in sort of inspiration and history as well. And so I'm selecting the four here, but only as examples. There are many more. And so Adidas, for example, in 2005 was accused of plagiarism. Zara, Anthropology, Louis Vuitton, and Carolina Herrera. So let me just show you sort of some pictures from there. But before I do, the entity in the US, in Mexico rather, that seems to be very active on this is the Culture Secretary. And so this secretary has been interviewed and sort of sending letters to these giant fashion houses saying, please don't appropriate our culture. And so here's the Adidas example. This is actually the president of Mexico sort of declaring how the government has forced Adidas to be in conversation with local governments over this sort of Oaxaca slip-on example that you see here. So Adidas just came up with this product, and everybody that's sort of originally from Mexico, or at least was observing it from Mexico, said, wait, that looks like a traditional Mexican product, and I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's huarache, is that what you said? Yeah. So it looks like that's traditional huarache slippers, and so you can't really claim that's an Adidas product. And so actually Adidas sends executives to speak with indigenous representatives in Oaxaca. So that conversation is still happening. So this is from 4 months ago, this August 2025, and so it looks like the highest governments of the highest levels of the U.S. Mexican government are paying attention and taking action here. The Zara example, Zara Anthropology and another company in 2021 had these products as well. Again, they sometimes use the Mexican language, the Spanish language as an inspiration and use that in the titling of the product. Sometimes they don't. And so here we have sort of the indigenous communities wording being used in the product as well. Right? The Louis Vuitton example from, this is 2019 on 2029, that's a typo. This is a very expensive chair, $18,000 for this piece of furniture. So it's not just utilitarian, it's also artistic. And this multicolored animal, typically sort of coming from the Tenango, the Doria culture. So it looks like it's not inspired by one, but almost like an identical copying, at least if you see the top part of that chair. Again, Louis Vuitton didn't say anything about this, didn't say if they were talking to the community or anything of that sort, as far as my research was able to reveal. And so it doesn't look like there's enough there that the company could be saying, you know, we're giving back or at least recognizing the source. Carolina Herrera's example is a little bit complicated. Actually, before we go here, let me go back to this examples. There's a layer here in the Adidas example in that the designer actually is of Mexican origin. So Willie Chavarria has Mexican heritage, and so the question there then is, you know, who is able to represent a culture, right? Do you have to receive consent from a specific institution, or can you be just a member and then use it? And so really complicated questions arise in that conversation, of course. The Carolina Herrera example is also another layer. So the designer Carolina Herrera has a Venezuelan heritage. The company is now globally famous, of course, but the company said, as they're sort of displaying this product, you know, they said this is representing the sunrise in Tulum in that region, and sort of the trip to Mexico City, and so this is representing positivity and light and warmth. And also sort of paying homage to the Mexican culture. So they're sort of saying we're not stealing, we're appreciating. So this border between appropriation and appreciation is really tricky. And they also say, because Carolina Herrera is from Venezuela, the Latin American culture is also being represented. Right? So you can see how complicated it gets really quickly here. All right, so all of this, in the middle of this, 2022, the Mexican government enacts the federal law for the protection of cultural heritage of indigenous and Afro-Mexican peoples and communities, and the Spanish version is also there on the screen. So I'm not an expert, obviously, but hopefully, you know, someone from UNAM or other institutions has done this research, and I was able to read a couple of the publications that are translated into English. But I think the world is paying attention to see what the Mexican government does with this. It's early to see if it's a success or not. But you know, people should be writing about this if students are interested in researching this. Mexico, I think, is one of the few countries that has a specific statutory language focused on cultural appropriation. Many other states sort of have some version of traditional knowledge or cultural appropriation or cultural expression rights embedded in there, but not as extensive as this one. All right, so that's sort of background examples on cultural appropriation. In terms of scholarship, as I mentioned, there are two camps, at least in the US, that I was able to read from. And some of the people that you see here are members of Native American communities, and so they're also members, not just professors writing about intellectual property law. So the group that you see here is strongly advocating for some sort of legal intervention against cultural appropriation. And so they define appropriation, of course, and then they go through an intellectual property or adjacent type of framework that should be introduced. And so my research is building on the work by these people. Now, another group of people, I would call this a cosmopolitan group. These are, of course, famous scholars writing in the law and philosophy field, some from NYU, some from other Harvard, and other places. And so the main argument here from this group, if I can summarize it, sort of a lot of nuance, but if I can summarize it, is that cultural borrowing is essential because it encourages understanding, right? It addresses racism, it addresses sort of this nationalistic behavior that some people might have. By learning from other cultures, you sort of borrow and take and learn about the people themselves. And so you tend to treat people better if you understand their culture, is the main goal here. And beyond that, at least Kwame Anthony Appiah, building on his Ghanaian and British background, sort of says actually that cultural diffusion has always been the state of culture. Culture has always been diffused, and so one community can't really claim to be 100% producer of one symbol or one design. If you always sort of look back, they might have borrowed it from a neighboring tribe and this and that. And so one, he says it's inevitable that it's always been there. Two, that you can't stop it, even if you introduce legal frameworks, and so it will continue. And I do buy, I think there's some convincing aspects of this research that culture is always in a constant state of diffusion, but my argument is it doesn't mean that the appropriation and the borrowing should happen for free without consent. I think cultures could be diffused with consent and licensing and conversation with communities, and I'm hoping the framework that I propose here will do just that. So with that background, let me then come to the contribution for this paper. So what I do in this paper is I say, the way we talk about cultural appropriation is very complicated because we are talking about so many different things. And so categorizing them in different buckets or groups might help that conversation, sort of improve the quality of that conversation. So the first layer here of distinguishing between appropriation is the symbol a diffuse symbol, which is to say it's sort of shared by multiple communities across the world, or maybe even in a nation, versus very distinct. So you see a certain design and you say that comes from a specific region of Mexico, for example, or a certain province here. And so the more distinct it is, the more legal intervention is invited. The more diffused it is, the less legal intervention should be invited. But also on the harm side, if a symbol is diffused, the harm is also lessened, right? Because it's not being taken from you specifically. It might be a symbol that has been diffused and shared by multiple people, and so another person taking it, the harm is less. And then the other is the use, which is to say, is the person using it to make money or for artistic purposes? And so if it's to make money for commercial purposes, the legal system should be invited, right? And so that in that space, taking someone's culture for making money, selling products and services, that should invite legal intervention versus non-commercial, which is, we should invite artists. We just came from the museum earlier today as well. And of course, we were talking about how strong the Mexican culture is when it comes to art and expression. And it borrows from different countries and corners of the world. And so that shouldn't stop necessarily. Artists shouldn't be stopped from expressing themselves by borrowing from other cultures. So there's some protection that should be there for personal, expressive, and political uses. Those are the three categories that I'm defining in the non-commercial aspect. But of course, there could be more. But if it's purely commercial, which is, the trademark system, of course, helps us define what is commercial. And so the sort of using commerce of those symbols should trigger some sort of legal intervention. So when you intersect these two lines, what you get is this quadrant, this taxonomy. And so quadrant one has a diffused and non-commercial, which is sort of the least legal intervention should be introduced there. So no legal intervention in quadrant one, because the harm is less and the sort of the use itself is non-commercial. So personal, expressive, political, those should be protected. The second quadrant is distinct symbol. The symbol comes from a specific community, but again, the use is non-commercial, artistic, personal, expressive. So again, the harm is less there, and it's less space for legal intervention. Quadrant three, it's diffused in this case, but the use is commercial. I think I still hesitate to invite the legal system because this brings up question of standing, right? Who gets to say you've taken my symbol when it's diffused? Right? Even if it's commercial, you go after Adidas, but you're one of 20 different communities that is using the symbol. And so Adidas could say, I took it from another community. Mm-hmm. So all three quadrants there, I think, make it really hard for the legal system to intervene. But quadrant four, I argue, is different, right? This is a distinct symbol, and you're using that symbol in commerce to sell products and services. And there is where I build the theory that I'm suggesting in this paper. So the first contribution is just this, what you see in the screen, that whenever we talk about cultural appropriation, talking about them in this 4 ways encourages the conversation, the quality of the conversation. So if a company's using it in the first quadrant type of way, maybe they don't need to ask for consent, and that's easy. Not a company, a person, an artist doesn't need to require consent because it's non-commercial and they're borrowing a symbol that's shared by multiple people. But if it's a distinct symbol, maybe asking for consent, even if it's non-commercial, asking for consent goes a long way, and so that might be good. So I just generally think this quadrant or taxonomy will improve the quality of conversations here. Now, let me give you examples here. Examples work really nicely. So this is our sort of American examples. Hopefully there are Mexican counterparts for this cell. So the first quadrant, I'm thinking of Justin Bieber, who was accused of cultural appropriation in the 90s when he was a member of the NSYNC band because of the cornrows, the hairstyle that he has here. And he apologized for it, saying, it's bad style. But again, this is a non-commercial, personal, expressive use of a symbol. Right, yeah. And it's so diffused because the hairstyle is sort of used by multiple communities across the world. When I did the research to see the earliest sort of discovered source of this is, I think, Namibia sort of 5,000 years ago, potentially. And so, but the evidence is really weak. But you have, in the Norwegian, mountains, the Vikings were also reputed to have braids, and so it's hard to allocate the symbol to one community, so it becomes hard. The other example is this Ghanaian kente, which is a very specific symbol from a specific tribe, the Ashanti tribe, I believe, from Ghana. They use it for ceremonial purposes, or weddings, and when new kings are anointed, I believe. And so it has a specific symbol meaning to the specific community in Ghana. And the Ghanaian government does have some protection legally for these types of symbols. But here you see members of the US Congress wearing it to protest. This is right after the killing of George Floyd and national reckoning on police brutality. And so members of Congress were putting this on as a political statement, not a commercial one. And so again, you might dislike it or like it, whatever your views, the legal system should not intervene here as well. And this third quadrant, this is one of the first ambassadors that played Aunt Jemima, the pancake mix, the famous pancake mix for breakfast. So there was the fictitious Aunt Jemima. The company was so successful that they hired someone who was a former slave, was working for a family in Chicago, to be the first ambassador. And then after she died, this is Nancy Green. After she died, they kept hiring other ambassadors, of course. Now, if you think of what the symbol is, it's this sort of stereotypical Southern slave person that's helping their masters sort of with making food. But most in the African American community don't really buy the symbol as an accurate depiction, so it's rejected by many. But some do say, including the descendants of Nancy Green, the first ambassador, that we should maintain the symbol, right? It shows what happened in the early 1900s. And so a disagreement on whether the symbol is sort of diffused or distinct. But it is commercial. This is actually one of the most successful commercial branding exercises in the early 1900s in the US. And so it is commercial, no question about it, but the culture, the symbol itself seems to be diffused in terms of what it represents. Now, lastly, I give you this example of a trademark lawsuit, actually, between the Navajo Nation, which successfully sued Urban Outfitters for using the word Navajo, in this case in relation to panties, of course, but drinking flasks or other types of designs. And these are, culturally, spiritually relevant, important symbols being used in this way. And so it was offensive to leaders of the Navajo Nation, and they brought legal action. And they succeeded in that they had strong claim. They had a registered trademark for the word Navajo. And so they were uniquely positioned in the US in that many other communities don't have a registered trademark. And so the Navajo Nation brought this action, and this also settled out of court, but for some unspecified amount being paid, and then Urban Outfitters promising to work with the community in the future. So this is how I would apply the framework here. Now, let me go back to the last part, the last contribution of the two. This is sort of the passing off theory that I propose. To sort of develop it, I go all the way to sort of the 1700s, 1800s UK case law. And so there's a tort of passing off. It's not the most famous, at least in the US, but the tort basically says, in a commercial setting, if you're a company that has goodwill, and this is sort of name reputation that gives you some advantage in the marketplace. So you have goodwill in the marketplace, another party comes in, another business, misrepresents their product as yours, or in some way sort of misrepresents the marketplace. And that results in damage to your reputation, damage to your business. And so if these three elements are met, then you have a tort of passing off claim. We call that the Trinity elements, the three elements. Now what courts in the UK did in the last 20, 25 years is extend that theory of passing off to products that have place-based reputation. So that one of the cases is this Greek yogurt case, where some company in the US wanted to import Greek yogurt into the UK. Importers of Greek yogurt from Greece to the UK brought legal action, and they succeeded in that legal action by saying, if it doesn't come from Greece, with the processing, the traditional processing of the yogurt, then it's misleading to call it Greek yogurt. And so they successfully brought this lawsuit. The judge in the UK said, yes, you can't. In the UK, the average consumer thinks of Greek yogurt as coming from Greece and not from the US, and so you can't import it. Same thing in champagne. Many other countries, I believe, except the US, recognize champagne as a sparkling wine that comes from the Champagne region of France. And so you can't call it champagne if it's not from Champagne, France. You call it sparkling wine. And so the US sort of found a way to recognize this right, but it's present. So those are examples of how extended passing off has been encouraged in recent years. So what I do in this paper is borrow from this framework and apply it to cultural passing off, right? This term that I'm coining, cultural passing off, is building on these three Trinity elements. Here we're talking about collective goodwill, not singular goodwill as a company might have. And so it's the goodwill of a certain nation, the Navajo nation, or the fill in the blank indigenous community. So it's a collective goodwill reputation that you have for being good designers or designers of high quality products. Or maybe, in the US, there's a lot of association with Native American communities as being brave and adventurous and all of those things. And so there are terms that are used to depict that strength, that quality. So collective goodwill. On the so misrepresentation part, I'm introducing here that the misrepresentation has to be about the fourth quadrant, the quadrant that I gave you earlier. It has to be with the fourth quadrant, which is a distinct symbol being used in the commercial context. And if that's happening, you have a passing off claim. Distinctiveness, of course, is both about the group and the symbol. When we say distinctiveness of the group, it's, is the community legally recognized as a unique community? Does it have place, sort of geographical location, same language, that sort of thing, right? So it's not one single element, but a collection of elements there. And then lastly, the damage, the harm that I recognize is, as I said, an economic harm, not just being offended, but somebody's bidding you to the marketplace and saturating the marketplace with products that have your name, such as the Navajo name. And so you're not able to benefit from the Navajo name in the marketplace. And so this deprivation of material advantage is what I'm calling that. So those three elements being met means that you should have a good claim for cultural passing off. So last portion here, I'll just apply this framework to this two cases, one easy case and one challenging case for this framework. And so the first is this Jeep Cherokee example, and the last is Gucci, this fashion house, famous globally for using the turban as a cultural symbol. First, with the easy case, a relatively easy case, we do have collective goodwill here. So the Cherokee Nation is a federally and statewide recognized nation in the US. And so it has a reputation as a unique community. And so there's market value there. And Jeep Cherokee actually is one of the most successful product line for the company. It used it first in the 1960s without consent from the chiefs. And so the chief actually in the New York Times published this declaration to please stop using it and to reclaim the name. Jeep Corporation stopped for a little bit for a couple of years and changed it to another name. It wasn't as successful. So they really needed the Cherokee name attached to the product. And so they continued after 2 years. The second element is also present here. So if you're taking the official name of a certain community, it doesn't get more distinct than that in terms of the symbol. So the Cherokee Nation, the Navajo Nation, you're taking the name, official name of the group, but also the sort of the community that we're talking about here, the Cherokee Nation, is very distinct in that it is place-bound, central governance is present there. There is a governing board and constitution, and all of that is present. And so it does help us, with all of this being present, to say that it is a distinct symbol. And then lastly, this deprivation of material advantage, right? If you read US trademark law, it's always been expanding since its inception. So if the Cherokee Nation was to produce cars, they can't, right? If they say Cherokee cars, you can't produce that because Jeep Cherokee was already in the marketplace. So it's limiting that. But US trademark law is even more expensive than that. So the dilution-based cause of action now says you don't even need to stop them when it comes to cars. Any other product that has the name Cherokee might be associated with this car. And so you might be able to stop others from producing other products. And so now the Cherokee Nation might not be able to produce chairs and tables and other things like that. And so this is the deprivation of material advantage that I recognize, right? And so this is the easy case. On to the last and hard case. This is the Gucci's use of the turban during its Milan Fashion Week, I believe here, was again accused of cultural appropriation. Now the market value of the turban is challenging to prove here. It's a spiritual symbol, so market price for a spiritual symbol is really challenging usually. The easy aspect of distinctiveness here is that it is a unique headdress, the turban. Anybody seeing it could recognize it as a turban, or most people, I should say. Now, but it's hard in that most other cultures around the world do have some type of headdress. And so it's hard to say when it becomes a turban and when it doesn't become a turban. But even beyond that, if you study the Sikh religion that the symbol comes from, it's very decentralized. So it doesn't have like the Pope in Rome, that's sort of the singular institution, centralized institution. It's very distributed in terms of as being a spiritual institution. And so it makes it really hard to say, where do I go to get consent? This accusation of cultural appropriation was made by a Sikh community based in New York, not by the one in northern India. And so there was some confusion around whether there was even appropriation, right? And lastly, again, loss of licensing here for spiritual products. It might be hard because, again, a spiritual product is not supposed to be marketed in this way. And so you might not find loss of marketing license or marketing income easily. Right? So I'll stop there. If we don't get to your comments or questions, of course, there's my email, but I'll open it up to comments and questions. Thank you.
Wow, Aman, first let me congratulate you. I think it was really, really clear, and I really like how you developed the theory. Let me just now change into Spanish to make a quick summary. I'm going to try because what you said is really interesting. Bueno, me parece que la exposición ha sido bastante interesante. Les comento un poco un resumen en español para aquellas personas que no alcanzaron a captar todo el contenido, ¿no? Nos habla de la apropiación cultural en general y primero, en un primer momento, nos dice, bueno, ¿qué tenemos que hacer? ¿Cómo funciona? En principio nos da unos ejemplos que vienen del contexto estadounidense, en donde tenemos a esta industria que se llama MGA Entertainment, que sacó unas muñecas que representaban a personas reales de una banda musical que se llamaba, no sé si todavía existe, las OMG dolls, ¿no? Bueno, las OMG, pero estas personas, bueno, como ustedes pudieron ver, son personas que pertenecen a la comunidad afroamericana, y entonces intentaron hacer el caso a través de distintas vías, pero no funcionó como una infracción de marca, porque no tenían, pues son muñecas representativas de unas personas, entonces no tenían la marca, la figura tridimensional, podríamos decir, registrada. Intentaron también defenderlo desde el sentido de la apropiación cultural de la comunidad afroamericana, y que se estaban apropiando de la cultura, pero esta vía tampoco prosperó porque en el sistema estadounidense no se reconoce a la apropiación cultural como una acción que se pueda poner en contra de una persona. Finalmente sí prosperó por el derecho a la publicidad y pudieron proteger los derechos de esta banda. Pero entonces así empieza él hablando del tema de la apropiación cultural. Luego nos habla también de este otro caso de Alaska, si ustedes recuerdan este tejido que es muy distintivo de la comunidad de Alaska, que es un tejido de cola de cuervo, y sale en un diseño como un pareo por esta tienda de moda de Neiman Marcus, pero aquí afortunadamente una persona lo había protegido, lo había registrado con copyright, bueno, para no decir derechos de autor, representando a la comunidad de Alaska y finalmente puede ser protegido. Luego nos comentó un poco de cómo ha seguido estos casos que han pasado dentro de México, el de Adidas este año con el tema del huarache, y aquí dice que una cosa controvertida es que precisamente el diseñador de este huarache pues es de origen oaxaqueño también, y que pues quizás aquí un poco la figura difusa es quién es la persona titular que puede representar a toda la comunidad que usa este tipo de huaraches, porque se ve que se usan en diferentes comunidades en Oaxaca, y entonces quién es la persona titular y quién puede hablar por esta comunidad, ¿no? Eso lo deja él como una pregunta abierta, pues un poco para nosotros también. En el caso de Louis Vuitton, en el 2019, con el tenango de Doria, si vieron que pues es un artefacto, ¿qué era? What is the Louis Vuitton? What is it? What is the object? Es una silla, perdón, es una silla que tiene un respaldo como el tenango de Doria, y aquí, just let me say, ¿no? El tenango has a protection as a denomination of origin. Geographical indication, exactly. Y que, bueno, también este es un caso mexicano. Y el de Carolina Herrera, el del vestido que ustedes vieron con un estilo de saltillo, bueno, lo que decían es que representa el sol saliendo en Tulum, que en realidad, o sea, en este caso lo que trataron de defender es que se trata de una apreciación de la diseñadora y no de una apropiación cultural, o sea, como que quieren hacer esa diferencia entre estamos apreciando el tejido de saltillo y no nos estamos apropiando de él. Y que finalmente otra cosa que intentaron empujar es que como Carolina Herrera es de Venezuela, pues también tiene raíces latinoamericanas y que desde ahí pues tenía un poco de derecho de usar este tipo de tejidos, ¿no? Entonces, después nos habló de algo muy interesante, que es cómo se divide la doctrina, bueno, que él ha estudiado. Mientras hay unos doctrinistas que piensan y defienden que debe haber un marco jurídico completo para la apropiación, bueno, para impedir la apropiación cultural, hay otro grupo dentro de la doctrina, a los que les llaman los del grupo cosmopolita, que están empujando por se puede pedir prestado de otras culturas, porque aprender de otras culturas nos va a permitir entenderlas mejor. Y el hecho de que siempre ha existido la difusión cultural, que siempre se ha prestado de unas culturas a otra y que eso es lo que permite acrecentar el conocimiento, es un poco como lo que el marco que tiran estos doctrinistas, desde el sentido de, pues siempre ha existido la difusión cultural y podemos prestarnos de unos de otros y no tendría por qué ser una infracción. Y finalmente nos habla de su, pues de su definición de la apropiación cultural. nos había dicho ya antes que no hay institucionalmente una definición que cubra el sentido de la apropiación cultural, pero él sugiere una taxonomía, que mientras más distintivo sea el símbolo o que sea aquel objeto, mayor protección va a poder tener. Y mientras más difuso sea lo que se quiere proteger, pues más difícil va a ser la protección. Y nos presentó un cuadro muy, muy interesante, ¿no? Para poder distinguir si se necesita o no, si se requiere o no se requiere de un marco legal que lo proteja. Él decía, si estamos hablando de un símbolo que es muy difuso, que no es lo suficientemente distintivo y que además no se está haciendo un uso comercial, pues entonces va a ser difícil que se pueda aplicar el marco de la apropiación cultural. En este ejemplo, nos puso el ejemplo de Justin Timberlake, me parece, porque dijiste Justin Bieber, Justin Timberlake, este cantante que en su momento cuando estaba en NSYNC se hizo unas trenzas, y entonces él lo criticaron por apropiar culturalmente este peinado. Y él nos dice, bueno, este es un símbolo muy difuso, porque las trenzas, pues, ¿quién es dueño de las trenzas, no? ¿Qué cultura es dueña de las trenzas? Es un símbolo que es bastante difuso, y además, él refiere, ¿no? Justin Timberlake no estaba haciendo un uso comercial, era parte de su forma de verse. Entonces, aquí no hay nada que proteger. En un segundo paso nos dice, podemos tener un signo que es suficientemente distintivo, pero que no se está usando para un uso comercial. Y aquí nos da el ejemplo de los miembros del Congreso en Estados Unidos cuando fue el asesinato de George Floyd, y ellos se apropiaron, digamos, de un símbolo como un símbolo de protesta de el asesinato de George Floyd. Entonces él dice, era un signo suficientemente distintivo, pero no estaba siendo usado en un contexto comercial, sino que también era parte de la protesta de los políticos, ¿no? Los políticos se apropiaron de ese símbolo porque ese símbolo estaba siendo usado por la comunidad afroamericana. Entonces hay una apropiación. Sin embargo, está siendo usado en un contexto que no es comercial, y ahí tampoco hay nada que perseguir. En el tercer caso, él nos dice cuando hay un símbolo que pues quizás es difuso, pero sí está siendo usado de forma comercial, que es el caso de la harina para hot cakes de la tía Yama, Aunt Yama. Y entonces es un símbolo un poco difuso porque presenta a una mujer afroamericana, pero que podría bien representar el símbolo de una persona esclava que está siendo cocinera y pues que cocina muy bien. Y aquí el contexto en el que está siendo usado la fotografía de esta persona, pues es un contexto totalmente comercial porque se vende esa harina, se sigue vendiendo, nada más que ya cambió de nombre. Es una harina para hot cakes que está completamente en un contexto comercial, pero dado que el símbolo es difuso, pues también no ve algo para proteger dentro de la ley. Y lo que sí se debe de proteger en el marco de la ley, dice, es aquello que es suficientemente distintivo y que se está haciendo un uso comercial de ello. Y aquí nos da el ejemplo de la infracción de la marca Navajo, pues que Navajo es el nombre de una comunidad indígena americana y que norteamericana, y bueno, pues justamente tiene un símbolo también, no nada más el nombre, pero aquí la fortuna que tuvo la comunidad de Navajo es que tenían protegido su nombre como marca. Entonces, pues vemos que sí que había un elemento de la propiedad intelectual que lo estaba protegiendo, y obviamente ganaron el caso, y porque estaba también siendo utilizado, me parece que era ropa interior, y entonces eso era un símbolo pues que también dañaba a la comunidad, porque pues es un símbolo espiritual usado en un objeto que no tenía que ver absolutamente nada con la comunidad. Y finalmente nos da esta teoría bueno, me voy a permitir, el del tort of passing off claim, que podríamos un poco traducir como un delito de imitación, ¿no? Entonces, él nos dice que cambiar un poco el tema de la apropiación cultural, que no ha sido completamente definido, por decirle que se está haciendo una imitación cultural. Y dentro de este esquema de decir que se está haciendo una imitación cultural, nos propone 3 pasos, ¿no? El primero, que haya una colectividad que esté usando el símbolo de buena fe, que sean buenos diseñadores, que sean, bueno, que sean muy buenos en esto que están haciendo, ¿no? Número 2, que sea un signo que pueda ser muy distintivo del grupo, o bien que tenga un símbolo que sea muy distintivo. Y número 3, que por el hecho de que se esté haciendo uso de ese símbolo, se le esté privando de una ventaja competitiva a la colectividad que lo creó. Nos daba en este caso el ejemplo del Jeep Cherokee. Bueno, pues que Cherokee justamente es una comunidad americana también originaria, y que es que nosotros le decimos diferente, nosotros decimos originarias y ellos quizás tienen un nombre diferente, ¿no? De naciones, ¿no? Sí. Es una nación reconocida por Estados Unidos, y pues que justamente sí, el hecho de que la marca Jeep le haya puesto el nombre Cherokee a uno de sus automóviles, pues está usando un símbolo que es suficientemente distintivo, que es colectivo de la buena fe, y pues que le está privando de una ventaja comercial a la comunidad, a la nación Cherokee, porque pues eso quiere decir que ellos ya no le pueden poner Cherokee a los objetos si es que así lo deciden venderlos, ¿no? Me pasé también rápidamente otro de los ejemplos que nos dio, que me pareció muy interesante, que es el hecho de que hay un yogurt que está hecho en Estados Unidos, que la marca es Chobani, pero que abajo refieren que es yogur griego, y que ese yogur no pudo ser importado al Reino Unido, porque en el Reino Unido no se puede llamar yogur griego si no fue hecho en Grecia, ¿no? Entonces, un yogur griego hecho en Estados Unidos no se puede llamar yogur griego, y esto nos lo daba como un ejemplo de esta imitación, ¿no? O sea, en realidad es una imitación al yogur que se hace en Grecia. Y el último ejemplo que nos dio es un ejemplo un poco más difícil, que es este turbán de la marca Gucci, que pues es un símbolo de espiritualidad, pero es un símbolo más difuso porque lo pueden usar, o sea, el turbante lo usan pues varias culturas, en varios contextos, y pues aquí está muy difícil definir quiénes son los indicados, quiénes son los titulares de ese contexto espiritual del turbante, para poder reclamar que hay una afectación al mercado, ¿no? O sea, ¿cómo podemos probar que hay una deprivación al mercado? Eso es un poco más difícil. Entonces, bueno, me quedo con esta propuesta que nos hace el doctor Aman sobre la imitación cultural, y no hablar de apropiación cultural, sino de imitación cultural, cuando hay una colectividad que lo hace de buena fe. Se trata de un signo que es suficientemente distintivo del grupo, o de un símbolo que es suficientemente distintivo de esta colectividad, y que por el hecho de que otra persona lo esté usando, priven de una ventaja comercial a esa colectividad. Con esto, bueno, doy la palabra ya sea a la doctora Carmen, el doctor Manuel Becerra, el doctor Rafael Pérez Miranda, para unas primeras reacciones.
¿Dónde anda Carmen?
Sí, doctor Becerra, ¿quiere una primera reacción?
Sí. Sí, adelante. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
Sí.
¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
Sí.
Bueno, en principio, felicidades al profesor Aman. Fue muy interesante el tema. Es de una gran importancia para nosotros, y es muy bueno que haya atención en la comunidad académica de Estados Unidos. Estoy hablando muy lento, porque en general hablo muy lento, pero más para que Ana pueda hacer una traducción. Entonces, esa es mi primera reacción. Es muy importante, es bueno que la comunidad estadounidense haga una reflexión sobre esto. Y por otra parte, a mí me parece que el problema hay que enderezarlo, hay que darle importancia al concepto de conocimiento como un concepto de carácter económico, es decir, la economía cognitiva, que eso fundamentalmente viene por los tratados internacionales que México ha firmado. La cuestión es que en los tratados de libre comercio, fundamentalmente, se hace una protección de la propiedad intelectual, pero se deja fuera la cuestión de las culturas tradicionales. Y pongamos un ejemplo. Se protege los derechos de autor, por ejemplo, de los personajes, digamos, Superman o Batman, o los superhéroes que conocemos y que tienen una fuerte protección. Al final de cuentas, son creaciones, es parte de la economía del conocimiento. Pero dado que en los tratados internacionales no son hechos fundamentalmente por los países que tienen una fuerte producción en materia, por ejemplo, todo lo que se refiere a la tecnología de comunicaciones, mas no son ricos en conocimiento tradicional, aparte de los superhéroes, por ejemplo. Entonces, los tratados internacionales no focalizan la protección de esto. El gran problema de la protección del conocimiento tradicional por nuestros países, por ejemplo, en el caso de México, es que si bien se puede proteger a nivel interno y en consecuencia dar una respuesta a los violadores de esos derechos en el ámbito interno, no es lo mismo a nivel internacional, que no existen tratados internacionales. Y ahí va mi primera pregunta para el profesor. En el jurídico estadounidense, las violaciones que usted menciona, por ejemplo, el caso de Butón o de Adidas u otros más, sobre conocimiento tradicional, ¿se puede incoar alguna acción en Estados Unidos? Esa es una pregunta que me interesa. Después, por supuesto, la idea del cosmopolitismo cultural tiene sus matices, porque si vamos sobre el cosmopolitismo cultural, también podremos decir que debemos de tener acceso a toda la producción de Estados Unidos, por ejemplo, a reproducir a Mickey Mouse, o qué sé yo, que también es una producción de carácter cultural y que refleja una cultura específica de los Estados Unidos. Y esto sería mi última pregunta y reflexión. ¿Es posible insertar en los tratados de libre comercio, ahora que estamos a punto de de revisar el TEMEC con Estados Unidos y Canadá, si es que esto se hace, es posible insertar la protección del conocimiento de todos estos grupos tradicionales que tienen un fuerte contenido cultural y que es muy importante para nuestra sociedad. Ahí hay muchísimos ejemplos de la producción nacional que está de alguna manera desprotegida. Y no dijera de cuestiones que es otra cuestión. Por ejemplo, que no es tanto de la cultura tradicional, pero sí es importante. Por ejemplo, todo el cine mexicano de la década de oro de las 40, 50, que circula mucho en Estados Unidos y que tiene una protección muy débil. Entonces, sumando mis preguntas, sería primero, ¿hay la posibilidad de incoar algún procedimiento sobre apropiación sobre algún elemento de la cultura mexicana en Estados Unidos? Dos, ¿es posible crear un movimiento para insertar en los tratados de libre comercio también la protección de todo este tipo de conocimiento? Y tres, habría que enfocar la problemática desde el conocimiento o el capitalismo cognitivo, el conocimiento como elemento de comercialización, como un elemento de carácter económico. Y felicidades al profesor.
Great. I think that the AI did a good job to translate your questions. Thank you. Very thoughtful comments and questions from you. And I've been taking notes to sort of see how I can frame my response. And I think I have three responses. So I agree with you that we should focus on the economic aspect and address the economic aspect of the challenge here. The first inspiration, the first good news is the World Intellectual Property Organization actually just came out with a new treaty in May of 2024, I believe. I followed that closely, and we had multiple conferences in the US about it. That protects genetic resources. So this was, the Intergovernmental Committee, which was dealing with this for 25 years, was just talking about it for decades, but because of some political movement tangential to it, apparently I've heard about the Ukraine war being the reason why they sort of agreed on this, but the US really wanted to give in on some aspects. So anyways, the treaty now protects genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge, which is to say, if somebody is using a native communities, indigenous communities, genetic resources, and then associated traditional knowledge and goes and patents that, now there's a treaty that will stop them from doing it. Now the US is not a signatory. I actually spoke at the US Patent Office panel for this, and I was only one of 12 people that said we should sign, and the other 11 I think said we shouldn't sign, and they were representatives from companies, associations of companies. So the US is probably not going to sign, but the rest of the world I think is signing up. And I think it already has 27 signatures, and it's going to keep going. So that treaty is an inspiration. Another colleague of mine, Margot Bagley, who's at the Emory Law School, was really a leader in the adjacent treaty. So she worked on this treaty, but also on the design patent treaty. She made sure, and she's a scholar that has published on intellectual property and traditional knowledge, so she made sure that the design, model design patent treaty, or design patent treaty that's recently signed also includes a traditional knowledge genetic resources reference. So if you look at that, there's a reference, the US I think fought it, but it was included in the treaty. So 2 new treaties that seem to point to a trend of recognizing. So that's one response at the international level. The second response, still at the international level, is you're right that the sweet spot seems to be regional and multilateral trade treaties. So the USMCA would be a good place to start. I did my SJD in Canada, and when I was there was already a conversation in Canada, in Canadian Native communities, of including in the USMCA some protection for intellectual property rights owned by indigenous groups. It didn't make it in there, I believe, but it was included as an sort of an additional side document. But in the newest revision, if Mexico being the sort of the strongest of the 3 in demanding this, makes a claim, I believe it could make it into regional agreements. Surprisingly, Peru is, in my mind, the most successful in this types of moves. So the bilateral agreements that Peru signs include traditional knowledge protection. And so I don't know how they were able to do that, because there's bargaining power differences, and so those will affect, of course, those demanders' requests. But Peru succeeded, so I imagine Mexico will definitely succeed if it keeps asking for that to be included in trade agreements. And lastly, I agree with you that this sort of cosmopolitan angle sort of misleads what we're thinking, right? So it says to let's be cosmopolitan when it's time to ask for licensing for cultural entities. But you know, the likes of, as you mentioned, Mickey Mouse and you know, Batman and Superman, you're not allowed to touch those, right? It's a very expansive protection that's given to them. So in the US, the approach has been, and I encourage people to do this in Mexico as well, is that there seems to be loopholes in existing intellectual property law that do provide protection. So I mentioned the Navajo Nation succeeded because it already registered the name as a trademark. In the US, if you use your name to sell a couple of things, 10 items, then you have protection for the symbols that are associated with that. So the use in commerce requirement is very low in the US. And then you can fight the big companies even under existing intellectual property rules. And so there's a lot of capacity building that's needed. Lawyers need to be paying attention and working with Native communities on that. Beyond that, it's sort of the scholarship and writing papers like this to see if there's a new space, what people call sui generis law, of its own kind. So it's a unique law to be created for passing off or cultural appropriation and the like. So those would be my responses, but thank you, really thoughtful.
Muchas gracias. Hago una brevísima resumen. Nos dice que sí, en el nivel internacional, como preguntaba el doctor Becerra, efectivamente la OMPI desde mayo del 24 tiene un tratado de protección genética que trata de proteger, bueno, no tengo la traducción exacta, cómo se llamará el tratado de la OMPI, para proteger los recursos genéticos de las comunidades originarias, y precisamente nos dice que Estados Unidos no ha firmado ese tratado, que él estuvo dentro de las juntas y abogó para que se firmara, pero que finalmente fueron abatidos los no. Pero que dentro de otro de los tratados de la OMPI, que es el de diseños y patentes, que sí se incluyó, y que de hecho pues una de sus colegas, que también es académica, se incluyó la protección de derecho tradicional y de recursos genéticos para que no pudieran ser patentados ni protegidos por diseños. Eso como a un nivel más internacional. Desde el sentido del TEMEC, nos dice que ahí definitivamente México es el que más aboga por la inclusión, y el que debería de seguir abogando, ¿no?, por la inclusión y el reconocimiento de este conocimiento tradicional. Y finalmente, bueno, o sea, si vas a poder ser metido o no, bueno, pues ahora sí depende también si Canadá también lo puede apoyar, ¿no?, en este sentido. Y finalmente, respecto dentro del cosmopolitismo cultural, pues está de acuerdo con lo que comenta el doctor Becerra, de que pues sí no funciona para los dos lados, ¿no? Que esta parte de la cultura estadounidense con las, bueno, puedo decir yo como caricaturas o personajes que hay dentro de la cultura como Mickey Mouse, Superman, Batman, etcétera, pues no entrarían dentro de este cosmopolitismo cultural de poder tener acceso, ¿no? Como parte de la cultura. Y pues nos dice que finalmente sobre cómo debe de protegerse el capitalismo cognitivo, él sí es de la idea de que los abogados, nos toca a nosotros abogados de propiedad intelectual, pues buscar las alternativas, ¿no? Como nos refiere el ejemplo de la tribuna abajo, que fueron exitosos de su acción porque ya habían registrado Navajo como marca y que entonces nos toca a nosotros como abogados de propiedad intelectual ayudarles a las culturas indígenas a hacer una protección para que puedan tener un efectivo, pues sí, una efectiva, una protección a través de una de las categorías de la propiedad intelectual para que puedan tener una efectiva protección. Doctor.
Muy bien.
¿Quiere hacer un comentario?
Sí, no voy, primero felicitar, ¿no? Ha sido una exposición detallada y fundada, excelente, de gran interés para México, ¿no? Y que se viene discutiendo en nuestro país hace mucho tiempo. Seguimos con, y que tenemos ya en este momento tanto una ley especial de protección como una incorporación a la ley de derechos de autor, ¿no? Referidas al mismo tema, pero siguen siendo incompletas, ¿no? Y no terminan de definir, porque por ejemplo en la ley se dice que las comunidades tienen derecho de propiedad intelectual, ¿no? Pero no aclaran cómo, ¿no? Es decir, en el sistema de propiedad intelectual casi hay una coincidencia, ¿no? En el origen del conocimiento. Es decir, el sistema de propiedad intelectual dice hay bienes comunes, conocimientos considerados bienes comunes, la ley de Newton, las leyes, etc. Y hay otros que pueden generar estos beneficios y que tienen un origen y que son reconocidos, se los saca, digamos, del mundo de los bienes comunes por un periodo de tiempo y después se lo devuelve, ¿no? Entonces, tenemos varios problemas y que no lo hemos solucionado del todo. Uno es, en el sistema de propiedad intelectual, el titular es una persona física o una persona colectiva, no una comunidad. La ley trata de solucionar el problema, pero con poco éxito. Lo otro es la temporalidad, es decir, un ejemplo similar a nuestra ley, que es el Código Ecuatoriano, ¿no?, de Conocimientos, igual las nuestras, igual los conceptos de la misma OMPI en recursos genéticos y conocimientos tradicionales. Cuando hablan de conocimientos tradicionales, hablan de conocimientos inmemoriales, ¿no? O sea, el autor no se conoce, ¿no? Entonces el problema es inmemorial, entonces, ¿qué plazo tiene el conocimiento, ¿no? ¿Y a qué personas le otorgamos el derecho, ¿no? Está bien, le podemos reconocer personalidad jurídica a las comunidades, pero eso es una figura muy abstracta, ¿no? Eso es un problema muy, muy difícil de solucionar. Y por último, creo que habría que reducir un poco la tendencia a expandir este tema, ¿no? Porque este tema se está haciendo muy, por ejemplo, ¿no?, Superman, ¿no?, o Mickey Mouse, como decía nuestro colega, ¿no? Y Superman y Mickey Mouse pues son una marca, pero no se vende Mickey Mouse como marca, ¿no? se cobra como derechos de autor. Los derechos de autor ya vencieron, ¿no? La marca es renovable infinitamente en el tiempo, ¿no? Entonces, si nosotros pensamos que Mickey Mouse es una marca, ¿no? Bueno, Trump registra su apellido como marca, ¿no? Lo cual es un disparate, ¿no? Porque suponemos, queremos pensar por el bien de Estados Unidos, que Trump no se vende, ¿no? Entonces, ¿por qué se permite que o sea, qué efecto tiene que una persona, y está lleno, ¿no?, registre su nombre como marca, ¿no?, si no la explota como marca, si no fabrica cosas, ¿no?, que se Entonces, digo, mis dudas siguen siendo, y no le encuentro la solución, por supuesto, ¿no? Esos dos requisitos anteriores de propiedad intelectual, hay que pensar en una institución que no sea la propiedad intelectual, ¿no?, que sea fuera del sistema de propiedad intelectual, por un lado. En el caso de OMPI, de WIPO, reconocen los conocimientos tradicionales, pero aclaran vinculados a los recursos genéticos, ¿no? Ellos tienen otro tratado en negociación que es sobre folclore, ¿no? Entonces, digamos, ahí sería donde más se podría proteger, ¿no? Porque además en México tampoco hemos logrado proteger los conocimientos tradicionales vinculados a recursos genéticos, ¿no? No le hemos encontrado la vuelta, ¿no? Bueno, esos eran mis comentarios.
Thank you. Let me make sure I capture the complexity of that. So I see 2 points, and I'll try to address both. Yes, thank you. So you're right that, so my SJD, my PhD in law was actually focusing on this very topic of, how did we get here? Why do we have intellectual property rules in the way that we have them? And so this difference between we want to protect, in copyright law, authorship, and it has to be individual sort of contribution, even if we have sort of joint authorship. Same thing in patents, right? An inventor has to sort of make a significant jump from everything that we knew. But again, in that definition, there's sort of confusion. My response generally has been, what I've discovered is that it just seems to be that the people that made the decision about what should be protected have a self-interested way of defining it in that way. So when jurists or lawmakers in the United Kingdom, the British Empire, wanted to decide, publishers should get copyright protection, they're not thinking about the public good. They're just saying, this publishers deserve to make monopoly pricing, sort of higher pricing than they would otherwise if it was open, and so we need to protect them. And it just sort of built up from that sort of a vicious cycle of expanding and more protection. And you're right, I think your comment was trying to get at how the fact that knowledge and information could be built by communities, communal information could be built, and that seems to be excluded from the current intellectual property system that we have. So actually the last publication I came up with last year was on communal authorship. And now it looks like we're going back to that, especially with artificial intelligence and how we express ourselves on social media. It has become very communal in nature, and so I talk about artificial intelligence tools like Midjourney and others that basically allow you to take from others and publish memes, for example, and dance competitions, where you're sort of stealing from others, quote unquote, but you're not really stealing because they want you to share their expression. And so it looks like we're actually seeing a new wave coming where communal expression is more valuable now in the online space, social media space. And so I agree with you that, if this was your point, that intellectual property law just decided to protect the individual and not the community, and also this temporal nature of, it has to be new from, in the past 12 months, if you submit a patent, it has to be new, right? And the same thing in copyright sense. The characters that you mentioned are characters that existed before. My students, when I teach intellectual property law, I tell them about how Barbie used to be a folklore from Germany and a very sort of very complicated backstory to Barbie, and so they get surprised. They sort of think that Mattel, the company that owns Barbie now, came up with the product, and so there's a complicated history of who gets to own what and how we're distinguishing it. Now, to connect your point to the previous comment, I actually think there's power here in representation. So let me tell you one story that sort of brings out this. Disney, we talk about Disney today, has a trademark over the phrase Hakuna Matata. And in Swahili language, in Eastern African language, it's a language that you say. It's sort of, I believe, something about happiness, right? Don't worry, everything will be okay. But Disney in the US has a trademark over that. And so you can't produce and sell merchandise. It did that because there was lack of representation of people from East Africa in the US, not enough representation. Now Disney again tried to trademark Day of the Dead, so Dia de las Muertes, wanted to protect it as a trademark because of Coco, the movie. But it didn't succeed because of how powerful the Mexican-American community was in the US. So enough consumers were present in the public that know the phrase, and so said Disney doesn't get to own it. So I think there's a solution there, even in the domestic space, of if a big fashion house is stealing Mexican symbols, you can actually collaborate with sort of different communities and say you can't do that because we have a powerful consuming public there.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Bueno, en general está de acuerdo con la idea de que la propiedad intelectual protege personas físicas o individuales y no la colectividad, y que también hay una barrera con que la propiedad intelectual siempre tiene una temporalidad, ¿no? En cambio, cuando los conocimientos tradicionales, pues, son atemporales, ¿no? Se producen. Y con esta… Con el tema de que en general la propiedad intelectual protege aquello que es nuevo, ¿no? Hablando de las patentes y de novedad, o aquello de que es original y que en realidad no lo hace del todo, porque nos daba el ejemplo de Barbie como una historia que viene de Alemania y que en realidad, bueno, pues ahora básicamente se la apropió Mattel, y que es una muñeca pues que ahora ya está en poder de Mattel, y que pero nos dice como un otro tema, pues que la frase esta de Hakuna Matata que está en el Rey León, que proviene de me parece que es Swahili del este de África, y que significa pues no te preocupes, todo va a estar bien, que es una frase así conocida, y que Disney sí se la apropió y que la tiene registrada como marca, y que nadie puede pues ya decir Hakuna Matata, ¿no? O sea, pero nos dice que también lo intentaron hacer con el Día de Muertos, y que pues a raíz de la película de Coco, pero que fue tan fuerte como el lobbying de que el Día de Muertos pertenece a la cultura mexicana, que pues no se logró hacer el registro. Entonces dice que si bien, bueno, le voy a preguntar esto porque eso es como mi conclusión, pero yo creo que pues si bien a lo mejor no está tal cual en el derecho estadounidense ahorita en este momento, pues sí hay cosas que son tan fuertes, o estos símbolos, lo que él decía, lo que es aquello que es tan distintivo, pues no va a poder ser imitado, no apropiado. Lo que sí es cierto también es que decía que no hay una representación de la comunidad de África del Este en Estados Unidos, y por eso no pudieron impedir que se protegiera lo de Hakuna Matata, ¿no? Voy a hacer lectura rápidamente a uno de los comentarios que nos hace nuestra colega, la doctora Patricia Basurto, que nos está viendo. Bueno, nos hace la precisión del tratado de la OMPI, que no recordaba yo cuál es el nombre en español concreto. Es el tratado de la OMPI sobre propiedad intelectual, recursos genéticos y conocimientos tradicionales asociados. Dice que no se protege, el tratado no está protegiendo como se esperaba, porque, bueno, lo único que está promoviendo es la transparencia, ya que requiere que las partes que incluyen una patente pues informen sobre el origen de los recursos genéticos, pero en realidad no hay una sanción y no procede en términos reales de nulidad para la patente, y pues finalmente los pueblos originarios siguen estando en desventaja. Bueno, ahora voy a traducir rápidamente eso y hacer mi comentario. Do you want so that I can make my comment in English,
Sure.
in Spanish, and we do it?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I'll put this on so that it's
Sí.
translated. Yeah.
Estamos maravillados con sus lentes, que no vamos a decir la marca, pero que seguramente ustedes ya vieron por ahí, que le traduce, cuando nosotros estamos hablando en español, le hace la traducción al inglés. Entonces ya nos estamos ahorrando un pasito. Bueno, pues en principio igual te felicito, muchísimas gracias. Bueno, me voy a quedar con esta teoría que nos das de la taxonomía de la apropiación cultural y me pregunto, bueno, hablas como ya del acto de la apropiación cultural, pero no nos platicaste mucho sobre proteger el conocimiento tradicional, ¿no? Es efectivamente, como tú dices, no hay una definición de qué es la apropiación cultural, pero tampoco, más allá de este tratado de la OMPI, de WIPO, ¿no? No hay una protección o un sistema de protección del conocimiento tradicional, ¿no? Porque quizás en ese sentido, y lo ligo con lo que decía el doctor Pérez Miranda, ¿no? En vez de tratar de forzar una figura de la propiedad intelectual que no le queda específicamente a lo que implica el conocimiento tradicional, pues podríamos tratar de entender la distintividad, ya sea del símbolo, de la frase, de la vestimenta, de los artefactos, ¿no? Entender como todo lo que conlleva, como he aprendido también, la cosmovisión de estos artefactos en sí, a través pues de su propia categoría, ¿no? Sin tener que intentar quizás forzar la de marca, la de derecho de autor. Eso, con esa pregunta tengo para ti. ¿Qué opinas desde la perspectiva de la protección y del reconocimiento de, bueno, todos estos elementos como conocimiento tradicional? Y también quiero, pues sí, o sea, un poco en el sentido del comentario del doctor Becerra sobre bueno, esta corriente de los Cosmopolitan Group. ¿Por qué hablar o sea, entiendo que el conocimiento mientras más se comparte, más se acrecienta y de hecho de ahí viene la temporalidad de la propiedad intelectual, para seguir poder teniendo acceso a la cultura, para poder seguir teniendo acceso al conocimiento, es que la propiedad intelectual tiene que tener una temporalidad. Eso, o sea, se entiende que tiene que haber una difusión, pero de ahí a hacer dinero con, ¿no? El doctor Becerra dio ejemplo de aspectos culturales de caricaturas, pero yo también lo veo en materia de patentes, en materia de medicinas, aquellas que están muy cercanas, ¿no? Y que esas sí se protegen con, decimos en México, con uñas y dientes, ¿no? Para que no pueda hacerse ningún uso mientras esté la temporalidad y que pues justo es algo que no nada más afecta al acceso a la cultura. En este sentido, en concreto, el tema de las patentes farmacéuticas afecta el acceso a la salud también, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, aquí no estamos en contra de la difusión cultural y de lo que promueve esta difusión cultural, pero creo que estamos contigo del lado de mejor tener un marco jurídico que pueda proteger a estos conocimientos tradicionales. Entonces, bueno, por ahí va mi comentario, pregunta.
Thank you. So this is really great, and I'm making sure to charge this class because it's saving me from sort of being the person that doesn't understand the language. This is really helpful. This is actually taking me back to the PhD dissertation that I did, which is mostly focused on patents and access to medicine and sort of how we define patents and whether a patent applicant has to disclose information to the patent office about traditional medicinal knowledge, which was the phrase that we were using, actually helps us encourage local communities be powerful. So the treaty, and sort of Dr. Rafael's comment earlier was spot on, that the treaty that passed was on the genetic resource and traditional knowledge, but there are 2 other treaties that didn't pass, and so they're still being negotiated. The traditional knowledge, purely know-how side of things, and then traditional cultural appropriation. And so I think your question also gets to that. So my take on the patent medicine side is that there's a powerful rule doctrine already embedded in the patent laws of the US definitely, but of course of international treaties, that says that it's a social contract. So we give you exclusive rights for about 20 years, and in return you give us information about the new thing that you invented. If the thing that you're giving us is past knowledge that already existed, even if it's in another country, in some other language, you still can't get a patent unless what you give us is a new thing. And so we can use what's already within the patent system to push back. So at least defensively say, this person should not get a patent because they stole this knowledge from a certain indigenous community. And the Enola beans cases are actually from Mexico that I used in the dissertation, where somebody, in the US imported Enola beans and said no other person can import those. So was even able to stop Mexican importers from importing a version of Enola beans to the US. And so the patent itself I think was very weak, if not invalid, but the US patent already has a duty of disclosure. You have to disclose your information in a way that says what was already known and what you invented. And so that person, I think, failed to meet that standard. That's one. But I do agree that I think the solution lies outside of the patent, the intellectual property system, what we call the sui generis or of its own kind system. And that should be grassroots, right? So to actually speak to communities and say, what do you care most about? And based on what the communities tell us, to sort of frame the legal system over that. I think communities were asked since at least 2001, when the United Nations World Intellectual Property Organization did research. The response is that they care about attribution strongly, that you say specifically if you took certain knowledge, know-how, or traditional cultural expression, you say that it comes from that region. So attribution is one. 2, informed consent. Mm-hmm. So you can't do something unless the person ahead of time gives you their consent. And 3, benefit sharing, right? So you do have to share some benefits, be it in the way of sort of partnership, maybe research sort of relationships, collaborations, financial feedbacks or payments to say, you get 5% of everything that we produce. And some actually fashion houses have done that for the trademark side as well. And so that could be borrowed where, one big company, I'm forgetting their name, they produce unique furniture. And so they give some percentage of the income from that furniture to the community. And that sells global. Unilever did this with the Hoodia plant in South Africa, where the San people in Kalahari Desert had this plant that suppressed appetite. Unilever benefited from that knowledge in producing weight loss products. And so there was conversation about giving back to a trust that's established for the community. So in any ways, I think because intellectual property law is challenging, it's better to create a whole new structure. And countries like Mexico, I think, are better placed because there's a strong demand internally to come up with a legal system that meets the needs of its own citizens, and then use that to inspire other people abroad. And other countries such as India have done that, I think, with the traditional knowledge digital library that they've used to then invalidate patents all across the world. And so sort of documenting that knowledge internally, domestically in Mexico, for example, would empower communities and then stop others from using it.
Muy bien, bueno, pues está de acuerdo con que la solución está fuera quizás de la propiedad intelectual, sino más bien en un sistema sui generis, en donde tres cosas que importan, ¿no? Que le importan a la comunidad conforme a su investigación, es darles atribución a la comunidad, que manifiesten su consentimiento informado, que es algo también que se pide acá en nuestra ley, y también que se propague el beneficio económico, ¿no? O sea, si se va a tener un beneficio económico, pues que se regrese a la comunidad. Y bueno, nos dio un par de ejemplos en donde esto también ya se está dando. Y respecto del tema de las patentes, nos comentaba que efectivamente pues él también estudió esto en su investigación doctoral, y pues que se dio cuenta que sí es usado el conocimiento tradicional, luego es hecho un monopolio dentro de la patente, y que él ve las patentes, yo creo que como aquí muchos coincidimos, como un contrato social en el que se le da al titular una exclusividad de uso a cambio de la información, y que lo más importante es dar la información también para que esa información pueda ayudar y seguir generando conocimiento e innovación, ¿no? Y que en ese sentido tienen que informar específicamente qué fue lo que usó, se esperaría que ese tratado de la OMPI pues ayude a que se revele cuál es si se está usando algo que viene de conocimiento tradicional dentro de la patente. Adelante, ya, para cerrar.
English or Spanish? English? Okay, well, congratulations. I will make the translation by myself after. Well, first, it's a kind of weird question, because is there a kind of a standard of proof about offensive use? Because I was listening about the Carolina Herrera, the real pronunciation about the trademark, and I felt that a lot of people could be feel like that the trademarks or this kind of cultural appropriations can be offensive, but a lot of people no, because there is a kind of phrase of Chavela Vargas that is not Mexican, but she said in English, Mexicans are born wherever the hell we want. And we feel like Chavela Vargas like a Mexican, and she wasn't Mexican, but a lot of Mexicans are proud that Chavela Vargas always was singing Mexican songs, but we never felt attacked by this kind of cultural appropriation. But in the other side, Taco Bell, I don't feel attacked by Taco Bell, but a lot of people, yes. I think that this it reminds me Immanuel Kant's phrases about we don't see the things like they are, we see the things like we are. And this kind of trouble, I feel that is a postmodern topic, because this is a very complex situation about what we feel like ours. Like in Mexico, the Virgen of Guadalupe, it was like 20 years ago, a trademarks application for the Virgen de Guadalupe. All the country was, the Chinese people is this Chinese person is stealing us the Virgin of Guadalupe. But if you study that trademarks applications, you saw only that it was for some lights. I think that it's a very complex topic. I feel that you are one of the first persons that I have been he conocido, I met about this topic. Again, congratulations, because it's very, very interesting, because it depends how you can see this kind of trouble. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we take the question and then?
Hi. Hey, Aman, it's great to have you here in Mexico. So I have two questions, very quick questions. So the first one, I really like the bridge that you're putting between tort law and the corporal appropriation, and I'm wondering what are the remedies that you're trying to achieve by using that tort, and who could claim the tort, you know, because as Professor Pérez Miranda was saying, so if the community is harmed, who will be the person that could bring the challenge before the court? So that will be my first quick question. And the second is, what are your thoughts about Gen AI and corporal appropriation, you know, because we are talking about all these big problems and big companies, but what would happen if, I don't know, a law student uses ChatGPT and he or she writes a prompt and, you know, all of a sudden appropriates, you know, traditional knowledge from communities. Thank you, and it was great to see you. I don't know if you want me to translate, Ana, or...
No, que nos conteste y ya
okay,
traduzco
ya
la respuesta.
traducimos los dos.
Great, thank you, both of you, for great questions. So let me address the first question first. So, yeah, standard of proof. So I do agree with you. I don't think we disagree on framing and how we should look at the issue. So it's particularly because of how offense is very muddy and how unpredictable it is that I focus on commercial use, right? So the taxonomy excludes claims of offense. You can't say, oh, I've been offended by your use and therefore I should sue you. And so, yes, sometimes it might be harmful, sometimes maybe not. But it depends on the people, right? So you can't make all people happy all the time, as the saying goes. So, but if you focus on commercial use, then it's no longer about offense, right? So commercial use basically says that you are taking money out of my pocket almost, right? You're saturating the marketplace using my symbols, and sort of the my part comes from the distinctiveness, right? So if it's diffused, you can't say it's mine. But if it's distinctive, if it's the Navajo, the Cherokee, the Lakota, for example, or sort of corollaries in Mexican culture, for example, there's this distinct community that has legal standing, that has physically bound institutions that can represent it. And it has to be, I'm thinking in the sub-national level, not at the national level, but specific communities that have representation. And I am not fully aware of the sort of governance structure of communities in Mexico, but if it's similar to the US, you might have a governing body, a constitution even, an office, a building. Native American communities in the US have borders even, and they have their own courts and police and the like. And so if you're saying it's commercial deprivation of material advantage, which is commercial advantage, it justifies legal intervention because it's very similar to already recognized harms. So unjust enrichment, for example, in contract types of breaches, tort type of breaches are already recognized. Mm-hmm. And actually trademark is a way of recognizing a commercial harm. So somebody's not really taking your chair or table, mm-hmm. You're just saying you took my symbol in a way that confuses consumers. And so it's not really removed from what we have already. But you're right that the legal system should not protect emotion in that way. Because of how different we are, because of how challenging it would be, and specifically because of how it oppresses freedom of expression at some point. So the paper does not argue that offense should be the harm that we recognize. It should be deprivation of material advantage. And so if you caption it in that way, I think it will be safe. And similarly so the Guadalupe trademark is interesting. It's not, so trademark law is a very interesting framework in that, one, if you give a trademark and somebody starts using it, very quickly it becomes something that expands. So you give someone a trademark over some product, they sell that product. Normally it should be limited to that type of product, but the more you expand, if you continue producing 2 or 3 other types of products, now all of a sudden the mark expands. And the dilution doctrine that I mentioned is the broadest of, like, significantly expanding at scale that right. So, you know, Disney was famous for one product, but now you can't use the term Disney for anything at all. And so I worry with the Guadalupe trademark, right? You mentioned that it was limited to a specific product, but once that is allowed, the same company or multiple other companies start trademarking, and before you know it, you can't use the term as a whole. And so there's a risk that once you recognize that, it keeps expanding. So that's a risk I see there. With Diego's question, thank you for both questions. And it sort of, you know, it sort of brings up this sort of law professor question of remedies and who has standing, how do we get there type of questions, and very potent in that way. So in terms of remedies, the paper sort of stops as a framework. It doesn't sort of give us the details, but the way I envision specifically standing is I connect it with the distinctiveness element. So a community is distinctive if it has legal recognition, geographic limitation, and institutions. It's centrally recognized as an entity. That means you should treat it as a single entity. So, you know, how do you decide if the Mexican government have given you authorization? You ask the president or delegates, right? So it's sort of the unified presidential theory, as constitutional scholars say. How do you know if Disney gave you a license? You ask the CEO or any representative of Disney as delegates of the CEO. So same thing, if, you know, how do you know who has standing in the Navajo Nation? It has to be in the framing, internal framing of the Navajo Nation, who is the representative. So it would be the chief or somebody who's representing the chief. So once you have standing, then the remedy should be connected to the harm. So if the harm is that you've saturated the marketplace, excuse me, in a way that stops them from selling products, then it's a commercial harm in that way. So, and the IP system sort of has a way of calculating lost licensing revenue. So for example, in copyright law, if you steal someone's book and make it into a movie, there's a way we calculate how much the movie made, in this case, how much the movie would have made, for example. All of those things could be calculated, and you say, this is a lost licensing revenue, and so you give back everything that you made. That will be a disgorgement of profits sort of thing. So I think those frameworks could be borrowed here as remedy, and the standing will be connected to that. Lastly, the last question is really challenging there, Gen AI and cultural appropriation. And that might be the second paper, the sort of the future paper that I write, but when I look at it, it's the rules that we have, I think, work okay in the new system. So which is to say, at least, you know, from the system that I know, the US system gives you freedom of expression. So the First Amendment right is really robust. So if you're using AI software to culturally appropriate something, and somebody ends up being offended, too bad, you know. Some people get offended. Maybe the court of public opinion would address that, but not the legal system. But if you're commercially appropriating using AI, I think the same framework should apply as I'm proposing here. But yeah, really complicated questions arise there.
Déjame, gracias. Bueno, voy a hacer un resumen y me dicen si algo me falta. Respecto de la pregunta que propone Swami, bueno, voy a decir, la respuesta es que la taxonomía que está proponiendo Aman excluye las demandas por daño moral, porque es difícil cuantificar de qué fue cuánto es el daño moral de haberse apropiado de algo, ¿no? Y que él se enfoca únicamente en el uso comercial porque es un poco más directo y sí justifica una intervención legal, y que además esto pues ya está regulado, entonces es mucho más fácil que si hay un uso comercial intervenga la ley, y que pueda irse a la corte, ¿no? Y nos decía que incluso, bueno, es difícil lo del daño moral porque podría llegar a atentar la libertad de expresión, ¿no? O sea, cuando no hay un daño económico, el castigar un uso no autorizado, pues puede llegar a dañar la libertad de expresión. Luego, respecto de lo que preguntó Diego, nos dice que que cómo se calcula o cómo debe de estar. Primero, ¿quién va a ser la persona representante, ¿no? Un poco rescatando lo que usted preguntaba. Y decía que la representatividad va a ser conforme cada una de las naciones, nosotros diríamos pueblos originarios, decida, ¿no? Puede ser como el jefe, en el caso de las naciones allá, acá pues puede ser la colectividad dentro de algún colegiado, no sé, como cada una de los pueblos originarios funcione, esos van a ser los que son los representantes de la comunidad. Y que el remedio, o sea, en materia del tort law, ¿no? Del common law, pues hay que dar un remedio a ese daño, y que pues ya está lo que nos dice Aman es, ya está muy estudiado cómo debe de darse ese remedio y cómo se debe de calcular, incluso aquellas regalías que se dejaron de ganar, ¿no? Eso es como una doctrina que ya existe y que por eso pues yo siento que es fácil conectar cuando hay un daño de carácter económico, porque pues ya existe toda una doctrina que refiere cómo calcular esta regalía que se deja de ganar. Creo que me faltó algo. Bueno, lo de la inteligencia artificial, yo aquí, bueno, justamente, yo ahora sí me voy a permitir dar mi idea. Yo soy de la idea que aunque se haga con IA, como se trata de conocimiento tradicional, debe ser protegido. O sea, si bien estamos en una discusión dentro de la propiedad intelectual de que aquello generado pueda o no pueda ser protegido por las formas de propiedad intelectual, si estamos haciendo uso de elementos culturales que sean parte del conocimiento tradicional, yo digo que ahí sí tiene que haber consentimiento informado. Si estamos diciendo que tiene que haber consentimiento informado en el mundo físico, también lo tiene que haber, pienso yo, en el uso que se haga en el ámbito digital. Adelante.
Digo, no es para continuar, nada más que un comentario, que es, me parece bien lo de daño moral, pero el tema es si le vamos a dar un reconocimiento moral con las características que en el derecho de propiedad intelectual tienen los derechos morales, no el copyright, sino el derecho de autor. Por ejemplo, ¿no? Yo puedo copiar un estilo, pero cambiarlo, pero que se quede claro que es el mismo estilo. Entonces, si yo tengo derechos morales, por más que lo haya cedido, no lo van a poder hacer. Digo, para establecer una diferencia entre daño moral y los derechos morales de la propiedad intelectual. Pero era nada más que para hacer el comentario.
Está bueno, sí. The concept of moral right, no?
Yeah. I studied in a civil law system in Ethiopia, so the moral rights was present there, and of course the French legal system was sort of really big on moral rights. In the US, we sort of said no to moral rights, except for visual artists. It's sort of the US was forced because of trade agreements, actually, to recognize moral rights for visual artists. But that's That's the only space in which the U.S. Intellectual property system recognizes moral rights. Now, that could be one thing. There's some opening, and so maybe we can keep expanding it. But because for decades that's just the only exception that's been introduced, I believe since the 80s or 90s, it will be hard to introduce this new exception. But with sort of changing global pressures, we do see many other countries already recognizing traditional expression, folklore, as being a sort of a cause of action for infringement. That maybe if the trade follows, most people work with other countries that recognize folklore protection, cultural expression, maybe the US will feel left out in that way. It could join. But as of right now, it's sort of the temperature seems to be that there's no intention of signing into the treaty.
Solamente existen los derechos morales, el reconocimiento de derechos morales en Estados Unidos como una excepción para artistas de carácter visual, ¿no? Ha sido muy difícil, dice que existe este reconocimiento, pero que mientras más y más países están entrándole a hacer el reconocimiento de los conocimientos tradicionales, que decimos nosotros, pues hay más posibilidades de que al menos eso se exista. Pues muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos siguen todavía por el Zoom y a los que estuvieron presentes aquí en la sala, y esperamos verlos el próximo año en las sesiones del seminario. Hasta luego y que tengan feliz fin de año y todo.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Listo, Eric. Tú la tienes que terminar.
How many people join us on Zoom?
On Zoom, 30.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a big group.
Like, yeah, but here 3.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Swami.
Very good questions, though.
Swami does his PhD here as well,
I see,
on
okay.
intellectual property.
I see.
Yeah, and the other person, I don't know who he was.
I see.
Good random person. ¿Nos tomas una foto, Eric? No, para el aniversario.
Do you want me to give you the pamphlets, the
Yes.
documents? There we go. It's a little bit heavy, but it has basically information about the Intellectual Property Center.
But, I mean, yeah, okay, let's figure out if you can, make okay, well, about the Intellectual Property Center in general?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the radio. This is Shane didn't stay on Friday, because the Carmen has a radio show, and the most of the viewers are students.
Oh,
So I'm gonna bring them there for to the radio.
Oh, to see.
Sí,
Okay.
sí, sí.
Oh, that's right.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Would you
Muchas
share the
gracias.
pictures with me?
Yes. Well, Diego tiene una. Ah, sí.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll do that on Friday, but you leave on Thursday already.
I can
no?
extend it. We'll see if
As-
the schedule.
Yeah,
I think they had a flight on Friday afternoon too.
okay.
So this is a radio channel where
It's at 12.
12. Okay.
It's from 12 to 1. It lasts like
Okay.
nothing, actually.
Okay.
But, sí. Sí.
Digo, no tiene nada que ver con la conferencia. Dos cositas que después te quiero hablar. Una es,
Sí, doctor.
¿consiguieron los dictaminadores para los artículos?
Doctor, hoy llegó, ¿no? El suyo. Es que se tardó muchísimo. El doctor Becerra ya lo entregó y hasta se publicó. Pero el mío, el suyo y otro más tardaron un montón porque la gente rechazaba hacer el dictamen.
Sí, el dictaminador.
Pero ya está, ¿verdad?
Justo el doctor Becerra igual me preguntó
Ajá.
si no tenía noticias.
Pero el de él no se ha publicado entonces, porque ya salieron 3 o 4 publicados, o sea, de los primeros. Pero ya se lo mandaste al doctor Pérez Miranda.
Ya.
¿Ah,
Sí,
sí?
ya
¿Cuándo?
está su dictamen.
Hoy en la tarde.
Ah, perfecto.
Tenemos tarea.
Lo otro es,
Ajá.
quiero organizar un diplomado,
Ay, ajá.
pero no sé cómo puede ser la participación del instituto.
¿Ya quiere que hagamos un convenio?
Podemos hacer un convenio. Si tú sabes cómo es.
Pues no, pero pregunto.
Ok, porque si no yo decía, que aparezca el instituto patrocinando, lo administramos nosotros allá, pero la ventaja es que si lo administramos con ustedes, a ustedes les pueden